"You really think the helicopter is broken? Then you're listening to the wrong thing." The remark drifted across the blazing flight line so quietly that almost nobody noticed who had spoken it. Almost. Tyler Brooks did, and the 28-year-old lead technician answered with nothing more than a sarcastic laugh before slamming the maintenance panel shut on the grounded UH-60 Black Hawk. The afternoon sun shimmered over the concrete at Fort Ashford, turning the runway into a wavering sheet of heat while the helicopter sat perfectly still, its matte black fuselage reflecting the restless movement of nearly 24 technicians surrounding it. Every diagnostic screen glowed green. Every sensor reported normal. Every cable had been inspected twice. Yet the aircraft refused to come alive. Tyler wiped grease from his hands with a clean shop towel, frustration tightening every muscle in his jaw as another failed startup sequence ended with nothing but an electronic chime and dead silence. Around him, laptops hummed, cooling fans whined, and maintenance specialists traded increasingly desperate theories. One blamed the software. Another suspected a hidden wiring fault. A third insisted the onboard computers had to be lying. None of it mattered. The helicopter remained lifeless, and the countdown clock inside the operations center continued to move toward a demonstration flight that could not be delayed much longer. Lieutenant Ethan Collins strode across the tarmac, his polished boots clicking sharply against the concrete before stopping beside Tyler. "Status?" he asked without looking away from the aircraft. Tyler exhaled slowly. "Everything checks out. Fuel pressure's good. Electrical system's clean. Rotor brake released. Engine control module reports 0 faults." Ethan stared at the silent helicopter as though refusing to believe it. "So why won't she start?" Tyler forced a humorless smile. "If I knew that, Lieutenant, we'd already be flying." A faint breeze carried the smell of warm hydraulic fluid and jet fuel across the flight line. Somewhere in the distance, another helicopter lifted into the sky, its rotor wash rumbling through the air like distant thunder. Every head turned instinctively before returning to the machine that refused to cooperate. Then an old gray sedan rolled slowly through the maintenance gate and parked well away from the cluster of technicians. Nobody paid much attention until an elderly man stepped out alone. He moved without hurry, wearing faded jeans, worn work boots, and an olive-green field jacket that looked older than most of the mechanics standing nearby. His white hair stirred gently in the wind. In one hand, he carried nothing except a weathered leather tool pouch whose cracked surface had clearly traveled through decades of hard use. Tyler noticed him first and frowned. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Ethan glanced over. "Who's that supposed to be?" Tyler shrugged. "No idea. Maybe somebody's grandfather got lost." A few younger technicians chuckled quietly as the old man stopped nearly 30 feet from the helicopter. He didn't approach the maintenance crew. He didn't introduce himself. He simply stood there with calm blue eyes fixed on the Black Hawk, not studying its instruments or panels, but listening with a patience that felt strangely out of place amid the frantic pace of the modern flight line. Tyler crossed his arms and raised his voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sir, unless that bag's carrying 40 years of miracles, I don't think you're going to solve anything today." The laughter came easily from the younger mechanics. The old man never reacted. His eyes never left the helicopter. It was almost as if the aircraft had begun telling him a story that nobody else could hear. Tyler Brooks refused to let the silence win. He slapped the side of the engine housing with the flat of his hand before turning back toward the cluster of technicians gathered around their diagnostic carts. "Run it again," he ordered. "Full sequence. Every subsystem." Fingers moved quickly across keyboards. Cooling fans whispered inside rugged military laptops, while rows of green indicators rolled across the screens one after another. Fuel delivery nominal. Battery voltage nominal. Hydraulic pressure nominal. Engine control computer nominal. Every result looked exactly the way it should. Tyler stared at the display as though willing it to reveal a hidden flaw. Instead, another message appeared in bright green letters. "No fault detected." He let out a slow breath through clenched teeth. "Start it." One technician acknowledged the command and pressed the ignition sequence. A warning tone sounded inside the cockpit. Several relays clicked beneath the panels. The starter engaged for barely a moment before stopping without explanation. Once again, the enormous helicopter remained perfectly motionless beneath the afternoon sun. Around the aircraft, Conversations became sharper. One mechanic suggested replacing the starter assembly. Another proposed swapping the flight control computer. A third insisted they should contact the manufacturer directly because there had to be an undocumented software issue. Every suggestion created more activity, more movement, more confidence that modern technology would eventually solve the mystery. Yet with each passing minute, the confidence sounded increasingly forced. Lieutenant Ethan Collins checked his watch for the fourth time in less than 10 minutes. The demonstration flight carrying senior officials was now less than 30 minutes away. Maintenance crews from neighboring hangars had quietly wandered over, drawn by the unusual sight of Fort Ashford's best technicians standing helplessly around an aircraft that every computer insisted was perfectly healthy. The pressure spread across the flight line like invisible heat rising from the concrete. Tyler noticed the old man had not moved an inch. Elias Mercer still stood quietly with the weathered leather pouch resting against his leg, his pale blue eyes calmly following the helicopter from nose to tail. He did not watch the technicians. He watched the machine. That irritated Tyler even more than the silence. He walked toward the veteran with confident strides and stopped only a few feet away. "Enjoying the show?" he asked with a crooked smile. Elias looked at him without offense. "Not particularly." Tyler folded his arms. "Good. Because this is not a museum tour." A few technicians nearby laughed again. Ethan remained silent, allowing Tyler to handle what he assumed was an unwanted visitor. Elias nodded politely. "I understand." Tyler gestured toward the helicopter. "You probably worked on aircraft before digital systems existed. Things have changed." Elias glanced back toward the Black Hawk. "Machines change. Some habits do not." Tyler shook his head. "This aircraft has thousands of sensors monitoring every critical system." "I know. Computers catch problems people cannot even see." Elias answered with the same steady voice. "Sometimes people notice what computers were never designed to hear." Tyler smirked, exchanging amused looks with two younger mechanics. "Here." Elias looked past him toward the silent rotor blades. "Every aircraft has a rhythm. When that rhythm changes, something is asking for attention long before a warning light appears." One technician whispered just loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What is next? Is he going to tell us helicopters have feelings?" More laughter rolled across the maintenance crew. Elias simply returned his gaze to the aircraft. The laughter faded almost as quickly as it had begun because despite the jokes, despite the confidence, despite the expensive equipment surrounding them, the Black Hawk still refused to wake, and for reasons none of them could explain, Airman Noah Bennett found himself watching the old veteran instead of the diagnostic screens. Airman Noah Bennett could not explain the uneasy feeling growing in the back of his mind. He had been assigned to the maintenance squadron for less than a year, long enough to trust the technology, but not long enough to believe it could never be wrong. As the other technicians crowded around glowing displays and exchanged increasingly complicated theories, he kept catching himself looking toward Elias Mercer. The old veteran had still not taken a single step closer to the helicopter. He stood quietly beneath the bright afternoon sky, his weathered leather pouch hanging loosely from one hand while his eyes moved almost imperceptibly across the aircraft. Noah followed the direction of that gaze. Elias was not studying the engine intake or the instrument panels. He was watching the thin waves of heat rising from the exhaust section, listening to sounds so faint that they disappeared beneath the distant rumble of aircraft taxiing across another runway. Tyler Brooks noticed Noah's distraction. "Bennett," he called sharply, "you planning to fix this helicopter by staring at our visitor?" Noah straightened immediately. "No, sir." Tyler handed him a digital inspection tablet. "Then verify every maintenance record from the last overhaul. Somebody missed something." Noah accepted the tablet and walked toward the service card, but before lowering his eyes to the screen, he glanced back one more time. Elias had tilted his head slightly, almost as if he had heard something no one else could. The expression on the old veteran's face did not suggest confusion. It suggested recognition. Lieutenant Ethan Collins stepped toward Elias with measured professionalism. "Sir, I appreciate your patience, but this area is restricted." Elias nodded politely. "I understand. May I ask why you are here?" "Someone asked me to come." Ethan waited for another explanation. None came. "Who asked you?" Elias answered without hesitation. "General Richard Holloway." Tyler let out a quiet laugh before Ethan could respond. The general has a full schedule today. I seriously doubt he invited a retired mechanic to stand around my flight line. Elias neither defended himself nor argued. You are free to doubt it. The calm reply somehow irritated Tyler even more than an angry one would have. Listen, he said, pointing toward the parked sedan. You seem like a decent man, but we are dealing with equipment worth tens of millions of dollars. We cannot solve this with stories from 50 years ago. Elias looked at the helicopter once again before answering. Neither can you. The words were spoken gently, without mockery, yet they landed with surprising weight. A few technicians exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tyler's smile disappeared. Excuse me. Elias slowly lifted his eyes. You have excellent equipment, excellent training, excellent people, but all of you are asking the helicopter the same question. Tyler folded his arms. And what question is that? What is broken? Elias replied. You should be asking what changed. Silence settled over the small group. Even the younger technicians who had laughed moments earlier said nothing. Tyler finally broke the pause with a dismissive wave. That is enough philosophy for one afternoon. He turned back toward the helicopter. Everybody back to work. Elias remained exactly where he was, saying nothing further. Noah lowered his eyes to the maintenance history displayed on the tablet, scrolling through inspection dates, replacement parts, software updates, and overhaul reports. Everything appeared routine until one line near the bottom caught his attention. It listed a depot-level rebuild completed only 11 days earlier by a contractor facility hundreds of miles away. Noah looked up instinctively toward Elias Mercer, and at that exact moment the old veteran quietly whispered, almost to himself, "It started after someone touched her." Noah Bennett read the maintenance entry a second time, then a third. The depot overhaul had been completed only 11 days earlier, and according to the report, every inspection had passed before the helicopter was released back to active service. He quietly compared the serial numbers on the replacement components with the digital inventory, while the afternoon wind carried another wave of warm jet fuel across the flight line. Everything matched. Every signature was present. Every box had been checked. Yet the words Elias Mercer had spoken lingered in his mind. It started after someone touched her. Noah looked up from the tablet and found the old veteran slowly walking for the first time since arriving. Elias did not head toward the cockpit or the open engine compartment. Instead, he circled the helicopter at an unhurried pace, his weathered boots making soft sounds against the concrete. His eyes traveled across rivets, access panels, hinges, and seams with the quiet concentration of someone reading a familiar book. Tyler Brooks watched him from several yards away with growing irritation. "Somebody stop him before he wanders into the rotor arc," he called. Lieutenant Ethan Collins raised a hand. "He is not interfering." Tyler shook his head. "Not yet." Elias continued around the aircraft until he reached the left side of the engine compartment. There he stopped. He did not touch the helicopter. He simply leaned forward slightly, studying a small rectangular access panel no larger than a notebook. Sunlight reflected across the smooth metal surface. Nothing looked unusual. Tyler walked over with two technicians following close behind. "What is so fascinating?" he asked. Elias kept his eyes on the panel. "Was this removed during the overhaul?" Tyler answered almost immediately. "Of course it was." "And reinstalled?" "Obviously." Elias nodded once. "Was it opened again afterward?" Tyler crossed his arms. "No. There was no reason to." Elias remained silent for several long seconds. He narrowed his eyes toward the edge of the panel, where the afternoon sunlight caught a thin shadow that almost disappeared unless viewed from exactly the right angle. Noah unconsciously stepped closer. He still could not see anything wrong. Tyler finally laughed. "What is it now?" "You found invisible damage." Elias spoke softly. "No." Tyler waited. "I found a question." One of the younger mechanics smirked. "Questions do not fix helicopters." Elias looked at him with calm patience. "Neither do assumptions." Tyler's confidence hardened into open annoyance. Every bolt on that panel was torqued to factory specifications. "We checked it ourselves." Elias asked another quiet question. "Did anyone open it after the rebuild?" "I already answered that." "Then nobody looked inside after another set of hands finished the work." Tyler pointed toward the diagnostic cart. "We did not need to. Every sensor behind that panel reports normal." Elias slowly turned toward the helicopter again. "Sensors only report what they are designed to measure." The words settled over the group like the heavy afternoon heat. Noah glanced back at the maintenance tablet. Suddenly, the endless stream of green status messages no longer felt reassuring. They felt incomplete. Tyler took one step closer until he stood directly beside Elias. If you think something is wrong behind that panel, say it. Elias gently shook his head. I do not think. I listen. Tyler sighed in frustration. To what? Elias lifted his eyes toward the silent rotor blades before answering in little more than a whisper. To everything your computers cannot hear. Noah felt a chill despite the summer heat, because for the first time since the helicopter had fallen silent, he realized the old veteran had never once looked surprised by the failure. It was almost as though he had recognized the answer the moment he stepped onto the flight line. The sunlight glinted off the edge of the small access panel, and for the briefest instant Elias Mercer no longer saw polished aluminum beneath his fingertips. He saw chipped olive paint streaked with rainwater. The smell of heated hydraulic fluid faded beneath the thick scent of damp jungle earth, aviation fuel, and humid air heavy enough to cling to every breath. The quiet flight line dissolved into the rhythmic pulse of rotor blades cutting through a gray morning sky more than 50 years earlier. He was 20 years old again, his hands steady despite the urgency surrounding him. The old leather tool pouch hanging from his shoulder was almost new then, its stitching still bright, the brass snap still shining beneath the tropical sun. A young pilot had pressed it into his hands only days before with a grin that carried more confidence than experience. Keep it, the pilot had said. You fix everything you touch. Elias had laughed at the time. He had not realized he would carry that same pouch through the rest of his life. The memory shifted as the Huey settled onto a rough clearing surrounded by towering trees. The aircraft had not been destroyed. It had simply refused to answer its crew when they needed it most. The engine had coughed once, then fallen into an unnatural silence that every experienced crew chief immediately recognized. Around him, younger mechanics rushed toward the obvious systems, checking fuel, wiring, switches, and instruments. Every gauge appeared normal. Every indication pointed toward an aircraft that should have been flying. But the helicopter remained stubbornly quiet. Elias remembered walking slowly around the fuselage while everyone else hurried. He ignored the instruments and listened. Instead, the metal spoke differently when warmed by operation than when resting at peace. Bolts expanded. Bearings settled. Thin vibrations traveled through the airframe in patterns invisible to the eye, but familiar to experienced hands. He had learned long ago that machines often revealed their secrets long before they displayed their failures. He stopped beside an engine panel almost identical to the one standing before him in the present. He did not reach for a wrench. He simply rested one hand lightly against the metal and closed his eyes. The aircraft seemed almost alive beneath his fingertips, not through magic, but through countless hours spent understanding how every sound belonged exactly where it should. Then he noticed it, a barely perceptible difference. One vibration arrived a fraction of a second later than the others. Not louder, not weaker, simply misplaced. He quietly asked another mechanic to open the panel. Inside, they found nothing broken, nothing worn, nothing cracked. Instead, one small spacer had been installed backward during a routine repair. It measured less than 2 inches across. Every instrument had continued reporting perfect operation because technically nothing had failed. Yet that tiny mistake prevented an entire sequence from aligning exactly as the engine expected. The correction had taken less than a minute. Moments later, the Huey answered with the familiar roar that echoed across the clearing. The pilot climbed down afterward, smiling as though nothing extraordinary had happened. How did you know? He had asked. Elias had looked back at the helicopter and simply replied, she sounded different. The memory slowly dissolved beneath the bright afternoon sun of Fort Ashford. The distant jungle faded into concrete, steel, and modern equipment. The weathered leather pouch still rested in Elias Mercer's hand, softened now by decades of use. Across from him stood Tyler Brooks, surrounded by computers far more advanced than anything the young crew chief of long ago could have imagined. Yet the same quiet certainty remained in Elias's pale blue eyes as they settled once more upon the small access panel. Some lessons, he reflected, silently, never grew old because neither did the machines that remembered them. The memory faded completely, leaving only the steady hum of air conditioners from the nearby hangar, and the distant cry of another helicopter crossing the blue summer sky. Elias Mercer slowly opened his eyes and looked once more at the small access panel. Nothing about it appeared unusual to anyone else. Its paint matched perfectly. Every fastener sat exactly where it belonged. Every maintenance seal remained unbroken since the depot overhaul. Tyler Brooks noticed the old veteran's unwavering attention and let out a tired sigh. "You have been staring at that panel for almost 5 minutes," he said. "If you know something, stop speaking in riddles." Elias answered without looking away. "Open it." Tyler frowned. "Why?" "Because your answer is behind it." One of the senior technicians immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not. That panel is factory sealed. Breaking it means documenting an unnecessary inspection, replacing hardware, and delaying the aircraft even longer." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We are not tearing apart a perfectly healthy section because somebody has a feeling." Elias remained calm. "It is not a feeling." Tyler crossed his arms. "Then what is it?" "Experience." The younger mechanics exchanged amused smiles. One quietly whispered, "Experience is not a maintenance procedure." Another added, "Neither is guessing." Their laughter was softer this time, but it still carried enough confidence to fill the space around the silent aircraft. Elias accepted every word without the slightest change in expression. He had heard the same certainty decades before from men who believed manuals contained every answer. Noah Bennett watched the exchange with growing discomfort. He looked back at the maintenance records on his tablet, then toward the panel Elias had identified. 11 days earlier. Depot overhaul completed. No additional inspection afterward. The timeline refused to leave his thoughts. Lieutenant Ethan Collins stepped closer to Tyler and lowered his voice. "Would it really hurt to check?" Tyler answered immediately. "Yes, because once we start opening perfectly good systems based on speculation, we stop being technicians and start chasing ghosts." Elias quietly replied before Ethan could speak again. "Ghosts do not leave paperwork." Tyler looked directly at him. "Neither do imaginary problems." Elias finally turned away from the helicopter and met Tyler's eyes. His voice remained almost gentle. "You trust every green light on your screen." Tyler nodded. "Because they are based on data. And data comes from sensors." "Correct." Elias gave a slow nod. "Sensors measure what engineers expected might fail. They cannot measure every mistake made by human hands." Those words settled over the group with surprising force. Noah glanced once more at the access panel. Suddenly it no longer looked ordinary. It looked unanswered. Tyler refused to surrender his confidence. Every bolt on that panel was torqued correctly. Every connector behind it passed inspection. "We have the documentation." Elias answered. "Paper remembers what people write. Machines remember what people do." Silence followed. Even the mechanics who had been smiling a moment earlier looked uncertain. Noah felt his pulse quicken as he replayed the overhaul report in his mind. Hundreds of steps had been completed correctly, but if only one tiny component had been positioned differently before the final inspection, every document would still appear flawless. Every sensor could still report normal. Tyler broke the silence with a firm wave toward the helicopter. "Nobody opens anything. We stay with the approved procedure." Elias simply nodded as though he had expected that answer from the beginning. He slipped his weathered leather pouch gently back against his side and took one quiet step away from the aircraft. Noah watched him leave the panel behind, but something inside the young airman refused to let the moment go. If the old veteran was wrong, nothing had been lost except a few uncomfortable minutes. But if he was right, then the entire flight line had been arguing with the only man who had been listening to the helicopter instead of the computers. Airman Noah Bennett stood motionless for several seconds after Elias Mercer stepped away from the helicopter. Around him, the maintenance crew immediately returned to their routines, opening laptops, checking cables, reviewing data that had already been reviewed countless times. The sounds of keyboards, cooling fans, and quiet conversations blended into the steady rhythm of the flight line, yet Noah barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on the old veteran walking slowly toward the edge of the tarmac with the same patient confidence he had carried since arriving. Noah had been taught to trust procedures, respect the chain of command, and never bypass authority. Those rules had shaped every day of his military career. But another lesson echoed just as clearly inside his mind. When something feels wrong, do not ignore it. He looked once more at the maintenance history displayed on his tablet. 11 days since the depot rebuild. No follow-up inspection behind the sealed access panel. Every report marked complete. Every signature approved. Yet one simple question refused to disappear. Why had Elias known exactly where to look within minutes of arriving? Noah slipped the tablet beneath his arm and quietly stepped away from the group, while Tyler Brooks remained focused on organizing another diagnostic cycle. Nobody noticed him walking toward the operations building across the flight line. Inside, the air felt cool after the relentless summer heat outside. He closed the door behind him and reached for the secure telephone mounted beside the duty desk. His fingers paused above the keypad. Calling without permission could easily create trouble. Remaining silent suddenly felt worse. Noah searched through the internal contact directory until he found the office assigned to General Richard Holloway's executive aide. He took one steady breath and pressed the number. The line rang once, twice. Then a calm, professional voice answered. Office of General Holloway. Noah swallowed carefully. Good afternoon, sir. This is Airman Noah Bennett from Fort Ashford Maintenance. Go ahead, Airman. Noah glanced through the window toward the silent helicopter. I believe there is someone here you should know about. The voice remained even. Who? Noah answered without hesitation. Elias Mercer. Silence filled the line. Not static. Not interference. Pure silence. Noah pulled the receiver slightly away from his ear, wondering if the call had disconnected. Then the voice returned, noticeably different from before. Slower. Sharper. Repeat that name. Elias Mercer, sir. He says General Holloway asked him to come. Another pause followed, longer this time. Noah could hear papers moving quickly somewhere in the background. A chair scraped across the floor. Another voice asked a question too far away to understand. Finally, the executive aide spoke again. Airman Bennett. Yes, sir. Is Mr. Mercer standing beside the aircraft right now? Noah looked through the glass. Elias remained exactly where he had been, quietly watching the helicopter while everyone else watched their screens. Yes, sir. Has anyone allowed him to examine the aircraft? Noah hesitated. No, sir. The answer on the other end came instantly. Do not let him leave. Stay where you are. General Holloway needs to know this immediately. The line disconnected before Noah could respond. He lowered the receiver slowly, his heartbeat noticeably faster than before. Outside, nothing appeared to have changed. Tyler Brooks continued directing technicians from one test to another. Lieutenant Ethan Collins studied another maintenance report. Elias Mercer still waited with quiet patience beneath the afternoon sun. Yet inside the operations office, Noah sensed the atmosphere had shifted completely. Somewhere beyond the walls of Fort Ashford, a single name had just interrupted the schedule of a general, and whatever was about to happen next had begun the moment he chose to make one phone call. The secure phone had been back on its cradle for less than 7 minutes when the distant sound of approaching engines rolled across Fort Ashford. At first, nobody on the flight line paid much attention. Staff vehicles moved through the base all day, and another convoy hardly seemed unusual. Tyler Brooks remained focused on another unsuccessful startup sequence while technicians gathered around the cockpit, hoping the next attempt would somehow produce a different result. Once again, the starter engaged. Once again, the helicopter answered with only a brief electronic tone before settling into complete silence. Tyler rubbed both hands across his face. Again, he ordered. No one questioned him. They simply repeated the same process because procedure offered comfort when answers refused to appear. Airman Noah Bennett stepped quietly back onto the tarmac, saying nothing about the phone call. He noticed the approaching black sport utility vehicles long before anyone else did. They moved with calm purpose rather than urgency, crossing the maintenance road before stopping beside the flight line. The first vehicle had barely come to a complete stop before the rear door opened. General Richard Holloway stepped out without waiting for anyone to greet him. His crisp uniform reflected the afternoon sunlight, but there was nothing ceremonial about the speed of his stride. He walked directly toward the helicopter with the unmistakable confidence of someone who already knew why he had come. Conversations stopped one by one as people recognized him. Lieutenant Ethan Collins immediately straightened his posture. Tyler Brooks turned in surprise, clearly not expecting the commanding general to appear in person for what everyone still believed was a routine maintenance problem. General on deck, someone called. The scattered voices disappeared into complete silence. Tyler stepped forward. Sir, we are still diagnosing the General Holloway continued walking without slowing down. He passed Tyler. He passed Lieutenant Collins. He walked beyond the cluster of technicians until he stopped directly in front of Elias Mercer. For several quiet seconds, neither man spoke. The entire maintenance crew watched in complete confusion. Then, to everyone's surprise, the general extended his hand first. Elias accepted it with the same calm expression he had carried all afternoon. "It has been too long, Elias," General Holloway said quietly. "Yes, sir," Elias replied with a faint smile. "It has." Tyler felt the confidence drain from his face. He looked from the general to the weathered leather pouch hanging at Elias's side, trying to understand what he was seeing. "General." Holloway finally turned toward the maintenance crew. His eyes settled first on Tyler Brooks. "Has Mr. Mercer examined the aircraft?" Tyler hesitated. "Sir, we spoke with him." The general's expression did not change. "That was not my question." Tyler swallowed. "No, sir." "Did anyone allow him to inspect the helicopter?" "No, sir." Another brief silence followed. General Holloway slowly looked across the group of technicians before speaking again. "You have some of the finest maintenance specialists in the United States Army standing here today." Several technicians exchanged uncertain glances. The general continued. "And yet every one of you ignored the only person I specifically requested to evaluate this aircraft." Nobody answered. Even the afternoon breeze seemed quieter. General Holloway stepped beside Elias and rested one hand lightly against the old veteran's shoulder. "There are maintenance manuals," he said calmly. "There are engineering degrees. There are decades of technical improvements." His eyes moved across every face standing before him. "And then there is Elias Mercer, the man who taught 3 generations of crew chiefs that machines always tell the truth if someone has the patience to listen." Tyler lowered his eyes without realizing he had done so. General Holloway turned back toward Elias and asked only one question. "Would you please show them what they have been missing?" Elias gave a small, respectful nod, lifted his weathered leather pouch once more, and quietly walked back toward the waiting helicopter while every technician instinctively stepped aside to clear his path. Elias Mercer stopped beside the small access panel that had held his attention from the moment he arrived. The crowd watched in complete silence as he placed his weathered leather pouch gently on the concrete and removed a single well-worn screwdriver whose handle had been polished smooth by decades of honest work. There was nothing unusual about the tool. No advanced electronics. No specialized equipment. Just steel, patience, and experience. He looked toward Tyler Brooks before speaking. "May I?" Tyler glanced instinctively at General Richard Holloway, who answered with a simple nod. "Open it." Elias carefully loosened the fasteners one by one, setting each screw neatly inside the pouch instead of placing them on the ground. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried, and precise. When the panel finally lifted away, the gathered technicians leaned forward, expecting to discover obvious damage. They found none. The wiring looked immaculate. Every connector appeared secure. Every component seemed exactly where it belonged. Tyler quietly exhaled. "There is nothing wrong." Elias smiled gently. "Look again." He reached inside with 2 fingers and lightly touched a small alignment spacer mounted deep behind the bracket assembly. Barely larger than a postage stamp, it had been installed backward during the depot rebuild. It had not broken anything. It had not disconnected any system. It had simply prevented a mechanical linkage from settling into its exact operating position during startup. Every electronic sensor continued reporting normal because every electrical circuit remained intact. The mistake belonged to geometry, not electronics. Elias carefully removed the spacer, rotated it, and reinstalled it in less than 30 seconds. He tightened the hardware, replaced the access panel, and stepped back without a trace of celebration. "Try now," he said softly. Tyler looked uncertain but climbed into the cockpit. His hand moved to the startup controls once more. The maintenance crew held its breath. The familiar electronic sequence began exactly as before, but this time it continued. A deep mechanical rumble answered from within the engine compartment, growing steadily stronger before the rotor blades began turning with smooth, confident rhythm. The Black Hawk awakened as though it had merely been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Warm air rolled across the flight line as the rotor speed increased, carrying the unmistakable sound that every mechanic hoped to hear but had failed to produce all afternoon. No one cheered. No one spoke. The only sound was the steady heartbeat of a helicopter finally doing what it had been built to do. Tyler slowly climbed back down from the cockpit. He walked toward Elias with none of the confidence he had displayed earlier that day. Stopping only a few feet away, he lowered his eyes. "Mr. Mercer," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I listened." Elias gave a small nod. Most people listen to words first. Machines never do. Tyler extended his hand. This time the gesture carried genuine respect. Elias accepted it warmly. General Richard Holloway watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction before addressing the maintenance team. "Technology will continue to improve," he said. "Our aircraft will become smarter. Our tools will become faster. But never confuse information with wisdom. One comes from machines. The other comes from people willing to spend a lifetime learning what machines cannot explain." Airman Noah Bennett stood silently at the edge of the group, realizing he had witnessed far more than a maintenance lesson. He had watched humility overcome pride without anger, without raised voices, and without anyone needing to prove superiority. As the helicopter lifted gracefully into the clear afternoon sky, Elias picked up his old leather pouch and turned toward the parking lot. He did not wait for applause or recognition. The flight line slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, but every technician present found themselves looking at aircraft differently than before. Some problems could be measured. Others could only be understood. And long after the sound of the rotor blades faded into the distance, one quiet truth remained with everyone who had stood on that hot concrete that day. The greatest experts are often the ones who no longer feel the need to announce that they are experts.